There is a moment in every life when the world becomes too loud, too fast, too personal. You lose your center. Something someone says cuts too deep. A glance, a betrayal, a rejection, and you find yourself spiraling inward. But not downward, because this spiral, if you choose, can become your staircase, a path not to despair, but to yourself, to the one part of you that cannot be touched by the noise outside. Today, we return to that place. You are not a victim of life. You are a participant in its dream, but to awaken within that dream, to walk through it with clarity and not confusion. This is the beginning of true mastery. Most people live outside themselves. They are mirrors, reacting to what others say, echoing what others think, imitating what others do. And so they become fragments. They forget their center. They become prisoners of every opinion, every criticism, every slight change in the atmosphere of someone else's emotions. But what if you could stop living on the surface? What if you descended inward, into the depths where silence speaks and chaos dissolves? The world cannot give you peace. It cannot give you validation, not in any lasting way. Because what it gives today, it can take tomorrow. And so the man who builds his house on the approval of others lives in a windstorm, always adjusting, always afraid. To master the inner world is to reverse the direction. It is to stop being shaped and start shaping. It is the movement from reaction to creation. When a person insults you, what really happens? Their words are air, vibrations, but it is the meaning you assign, the personal script you overlay, that causes the wound. The insult touches only the ego, and the ego panics because it believes it is the self. But the deeper self, the true self, is untouchable. Can you see it? The difference between pain and suffering. Pain is natural. But suffering arises when the mind resists what is, when it refuses to surrender to the wisdom of experience. Inner mastery is not about force. It is about understanding. You must learn to sit with discomfort, to listen to what your own emotions are trying to tell you, not obey them blindly, but observe them like a wise elder watches over a child. There is a kingdom within you, a vast terrain of thought, memory, instinct, spirit. You must walk that terrain. You must learn its language. You cannot fix the chaos outside until you bring order inside. And to bring order, you must first observe the disorder without judgment. Look at your thoughts without flinching. Sit with your fear without running. Witness your desires without shame. The one who can observe himself is no longer ruled by himself. He becomes the master, not the puppet. But this mastery is not perfection. It is presence. It is the daily decision to return to yourself, to respond instead of react, to choose clarity over confusion, to sit in silence when the world demands noise. There are battles no one sees, the war between your peace and your programming, your truth and your trauma. But the one who wins is not the loudest voice. It is the one you feed. And still, the world will keep knocking. Still, people will come with their chaos, their needs, their demands, their unconscious expectations. And you will be tempted, again and again, to lose yourself in it, to chase validation, to defend your name, to prove your worth. But the more you master the inner world, the less you will need to fight. Because you will know, the truth does not shout, it simply is. You will become the calm in the room, the stillness in the storm, the one who no longer seeks control, because he has already found it. There are parts of you that you have buried, not because they were evil, but because at some point someone told you they were unacceptable, too much, too wild, too dangerous, and so you learned to smile while silencing your anger, to agree while suppressing your truth, to be good, even if it cost you your authenticity. But the shadow does not die just because you ignore it. It grows teeth, it grows a voice, and when it is unheard, it screams from the unconscious. You see it in your projections, The people who irritate you, they carry something you have not yet faced within yourself. You see it in your reactions, the sudden rage, the deep jealousy, the fear that makes no sense. The shadow does not ask for shame, it asks for integration. The darkness in you is not there to destroy you, it is there to complete you. You are not only light, you are fire and water, lion and lamb, chaos and cosmos. Until you integrate the shadow, it will run your life in the background. It will sabotage your relationships, undermine your self-worth, and shape your choices without your awareness. But the moment you turn toward it, the moment you say, I see you, I will not exile you anymore, it begins to transform. Anger, when integrated, becomes healthy boundaries. Fear, when faced, becomes wisdom. Jealousy, when acknowledged, becomes clarity about what matters. You were never meant to amputate parts of yourself in order to be loved. You were meant to be whole, fully human, not surgically pure. This is not about indulgence. It's not about letting the shadow lead. It's about giving it a seat at the table so it no longer needs to scream through your wounds. Most people wear masks not because they are fake, but because they are afraid that if the world saw the whole of them, they would no longer be accepted. But it is not the mask that protects you. It is the integration of what lies beneath it. Imagine this: a person speaks harshly to you, criticizes you, belittles you. If your shadow is still disowned, you will either collapse in guilt or explode in rage. But if you have integrated your shadow, if you've made peace with your own capacity to be strong, to be assertive, to say no, then their words lose power. They hit a wall of wholeness that does not need to defend itself. You cannot be manipulated when you are not divided. You cannot be triggered when there is no unhealed part to touch. To walk with your shadow is to walk with truth. It is to accept that you are not just who you are when people are watching, but who you are when you are alone with your thoughts, your longings, your shame. And the deeper you go, the more you realize the parts of you that you feared the most are the parts that carry your greatest strength. In the cave of the shadow lies the treasure you thought you had to seek in the world. The power is not in destroying the darkness. The power is in lighting a candle and walking into it willingly. To detach does not mean you do not care. It does not mean you walk through life untouched, unfeeling, unmoved. Detachment is often misunderstood, mistaken for emotional distance, for apathy, for a hardening of the heart. But the truth is much more sacred than that. Detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of awareness. To be detached is to be fully present, so present, in fact, that you are no longer fused with what you are experiencing. You witness the emotion. You feel it, you even allow it to move through you, but you do not become it. You feel the pain of betrayal, but you are not the betrayal. You notice the sting of rejection, but it does not rewrite your worth. You observe the rise of anger, but you do not become its servant. You allow sorrow to visit, but you no longer invite it to build a home. Detachment is the discipline of the soul. It is the art of holding everything without clinging to anything. Most people suffer not because of what happens, but because they grip too tightly to what is passing. They confuse attachment with love, control with power, reaction with authenticity. But what if you could love deeply without losing yourself? What if you could give everything without being emptied? To detach is not to withdraw, it is to return to center so that you can relate without possession, engage without entanglement, love without losing ground. It is the moment when you no longer beg reality to be different than it is. You allow life to unfold. You stop grasping. You begin to trust. In detachment, you see clearly. You see who is truly there and who is only there to fill a hole. You see what situations are yours to heal and what wounds are not yours to carry. You begin to recognize your own patterns the way you've wrapped your identity around outcomes, around people, around roles that were never meant to define you. And when those roles crumble, when those people walk away, when those outcomes fail to materialize, you remain intact, unbroken, because you no longer confuse the temporary with the eternal. You start to move from the observer's seat, not coldly, not from a distance, but with full presence. With compassion, with a softness that does not bend to chaos. In this space, you begin to feel emotions without being owned by them. You begin to navigate relationships without needing to control them. You begin to face adversity without collapsing under it. You are no longer the wave tossed in the sea. You are the ocean itself, still, vast, silent in your knowing. The world will still pull at you. People will still try to make their emotions your responsibility, but you will recognize the difference between what belongs to you and what does not. And in that awareness, you do not harden, you soften even more. Because now you love from freedom, not fear. You speak from depth, not defense. You choose rather than chase. You are no longer seeking to fix, to change, to possess. You are simply present, and presence is the greatest power there is. There is something within you that cannot be shaken. It existed before you learned your name, before you were molded by the hands of culture, conditioned by the gaze of others, shaped by success and scarred by failure. It is the self, not the personality, not the mask, not the ever-shifting moods, but the eternal center of your being, the core that watches, waits, witnesses. While the ego grasps, the self remains. While the world praises or rejects, the self stays untouched. You may have forgotten it, lost sight of it in the noise, buried it beneath identities, jobs, roles, relationships, but it was never lost, only hidden. The self is not something you create. It is something you remember. When you were a child, before language took hold, before the need to impress, to succeed, to be liked, there was only awareness. You looked at the sky and did not name it. You felt sadness and did not resist it. You lived from presence, not performance. But over time you were taught who to be. You were taught which parts of you were acceptable, what to suppress, what to achieve, what to fear. And so the ego was born, a necessary structure, but a fragile one. It took on titles. It identified with the body, the mind, the roles. It needed control, certainty, validation. It needed to be seen, because it was afraid of disappearing. But the self does not need to be seen, because it sees all. It does not seek approval, because it exists beyond the reach of praise or blame. It does not grasp at power, because it is power itself, silent, calm, immovable. To encounter the self is to step out of the mirror, to stop seeing yourself only through reflection and start being without explanation. You no longer need the world to tell you who you are. You simply are, not as a concept, but as a presence. And this presence, it does not compete. It does not rush. It does not argue. It knows. It is the part of you that cannot be humiliated, because it carries no pride. It cannot be threatened, because it clings to nothing. It cannot be broken, because it was never born and never dies. To live from the self is not to abandon the world. It is to move through it with rootedness. You still love, you still serve, you still strive, but from a place that is no longer seeking to be made whole because you already are. From the self, you do not chase meaning, you radiate it. You do not beg for purpose, you embody it. You may lose relationships, you may lose titles, reputations, approval, but you do not lose yourself. And in that knowing, you begin to see through the illusions that once ruled you. You begin to smile at the chaos, not because it doesn't matter, but because you no longer need to cling to order. You are no longer at war with life. You are no longer at war with yourself. From the self you welcome everything. You resist nothing. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin to ask, what part of me is being called to awaken? And as you ask, you begin to hear a new voice, not the anxious voice of the mind, not the wounded voice of the past, but the still, steady whisper of the one who has always been there, waiting for you to return. Pain is inevitable. It touches everyone, the rich and the poor, the wise and the naive, the faithful and the doubting. Suffering, however, is not simply pain. Suffering is pain without purpose. It is agony without meaning. It is the wound that festers in the dark because it was never brought into the light. But when pain is given meaning, it becomes transformation. You were not meant to go through life untouched. You were meant to be shaped. Not shattered, but refined, like iron in the fire, like gold in the furnace. There is something the soul gains through sorrow that cannot be learned in comfort. It is through heartbreak that you discover what truly matters. It is through disappointment that you are freed from illusions. It is through loss that you remember what cannot be lost. And yet, this is not about romanticizing suffering. It is about redeeming it. The wound is not holy in itself, but it becomes holy when it becomes the doorway through which consciousness walks. There are those who have endured unspeakable pain, abandonment, betrayal, abuse, grief, and yet, instead of being crushed, they have emerged with eyes that see deeper, hearts that feel wider, spirits that no longer cling to what is passing. What happened to them did not make them powerful. What they did with what happened, that's where the transformation lies. You must ask yourself, what am I going to do with this suffering? Will I use it to harden, to blame, to isolate, to shrink, or will I let it open me, deepen me, shape me into someone who no longer needs to understand everything in order to trust? You do not need to find comfort in what you've endured, but you can find clarity. You can find the thread that runs through the chaos, the thread that says, this too belongs, this too is part of the whole. You cannot control what the world brings to your doorstep, but you can choose how to walk through the threshold. You can choose to bring fire to the cold. You can choose to hold meaning like a lantern in the night, because without meaning, pain is just pain. But with meaning, pain becomes a teacher. It becomes the soil where new life grows. It becomes the crucible that burns away everything false until only the real remains. The person who has found meaning in suffering can no longer be defeated, because they no longer see life as something that owes them anything. They are no longer bargaining with fate, they are dancing with it, even when it leads them through shadow, even when it hands them silence instead of answers. Suffering ceases to be a curse when it becomes the path back to the soul. You start to recognize the deeper patterns, that your heartbreak opened your empathy, that your failures taught you humility, that your loneliness forced you to face yourself. The greatest tragedies are not what happened to us. The greatest tragedies are what we allow to die inside us when they happen. But the moment you choose to live again, even with tears in your eyes, even with questions unanswered, you reclaim your power. Not the power to avoid pain, but the power to transcend it, to turn it into wisdom, to turn it into fuel, to turn it into the very thing that awakens others. Because there will come a time when someone sits in your presence, broken, and your scars will speak louder than your words. Not because you have the answers, but because you have been there, and you made it through, not unscathed, but remade. And the meaning you carved out of your suffering will become the torch you pass to someone still wandering in the dark.